Hello, and welcome to Adventures with ADHD, where we talk to autistic and ADHD folk and we find out their views. And today I've got Nikki with me. Hi, Nikki.
Hello, you're right.
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for coming. So we discussed a while back that we were going to watch the first Chris Packham documentary and discuss it on this show today. And we haven't discussed it. We did start to discuss it, then we stopped ourselves because we
Mhm.
wanted to save our discussion for this episode. It's for those of you that are in the UK, it's on BBC Two, so iPlayer. Um, Inside Our Autistic Minds, episode one is what we both watched, and we're going to talk about how what we thought and how it affected us, aren't we?
Yeah, we are indeed.
It's quite emotional. So yeah, what were your first impressions of the documentary, Nikki?
So we'd agreed that we'd watch it. And what was quite interesting for me is that I kept putting it off. I kept like
Yeah,
thinking, I'll watch it tomorrow, I'll watch it tomorrow. And I don't know why. And I think maybe because I'm still coming to terms with my own diagnosis. So I don't know what I was expecting. But I watched it on Friday night and oh my goodness, like I watched it literally crying my eyes out. And I think that there were just so many things to take away from it. Like if you if I think about, I don't know whether you want to kind of go through it in a bit more kind of a structured way or just for me to blurt out my overall
just
takeaway.
just blurt out, and I've got some notes so we can just kind of,
So
do it.
there were two things for me that really struck me, and one of them I actually haven't been able to stop thinking about. And that was the conversation at the school for the young girls, where they said that I think the term they used was um, it was around being non-intellectually challenged or something. Basically, intelligent autistic women are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. And and that really, like I was just sat there crying when I kind of heard that statistic, partly because for me that's just a devastating statistic that there are versions of us that are like that, but also because of my own experience during lockdown when I found that whole experience, and closing my business and all of that so overwhelming that for the first time in my life, that was something that crossed my mind. It wasn't something that I had any plans to do or put any plans in place to do, but it was something that I considered. And so it really had a profound effect on me in the how many women that it's impacting, but it was a real stark reminder of that kind of really challenging time in my life. And I was undiagnosed at that point, so I didn't really understand why I was spiraling and struggling the way I was, and it caused a lot of distress and actually the breakdown of my relationship because of how difficult and how frantic and frenetic I was during that time. But then the other big takeaway that was just beautiful from this episode was Murray, Ken Bruce. It was Murray, wasn't it? Ken Bruce's son, who is non-verbal autistic, and they found a way for him to communicate and share his thoughts. And I was staggered, but like everything he said was so considered, so profound, and so highly intelligent. And I think it was so easy to assume that when somebody's non-verbal, that they, maybe don't have that level of intelligence. And it was a real lesson for me. But it honestly, if people haven't watched it, watch it because it is really eye-opening. It's really heartwarming, and it's incredibly profound.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, Murray being able to express himself.
Yeah,
And what I wrote down was just so Murray was so articulate
yeah.
with his words. And yeah, it takes longer for him to express himself. But um just, I'm still crying from the whole thing. I only watched it earlier today. And just crying for lots of emotions, for myself, growing up undiagnosed, like really relating to Flo, who we'll
Yeah,
talk about
yeah,
in a moment. Um, for Murray, who, you know, when he was saying, I yearn and pine to talk and to be heard and to be
yeah,
listened to, that was just heartbreaking, because I've worked with so many autistic people throughout the years, children and adults, and it just kind of, it felt like I was hearing all of those people, myself, my
yeah,
client, such as yourself. It was so emotional on so many levels, and there was, oh, it was, yeah, it was mind blowing, really. But the school, I mean, I was crying about that as well.
mm,
Thinking, thank goodness these girls have got that school to go
yeah,
to. There's millions that haven't. Um, you know, and that school environment where they're encouraged to unmask and
yeah,
oh yeah, it's just, and then I was kind of thinking about my own story of masking, my own experience of
mm,
masking from a very young age, you know, and how quite sad that is, because I don't think I'll ever potentially unmask completely, because it's so ingrained.
yeah,
I mean, I am bit by bit unmasking and by talking about it,
yeah,
but it was, oh my God, so emotional. I was crying my eyes out the whole way through as well.
yeah. Oh, and I think it's so difficult, isn't it? It's like it was such a roller coaster of emotions, and I can kind of understand, like, when they sort of say, but with girls it's so much harder with females to identify and to diagnose, because we are far more driven to be socially accepted and to form those social bonds or those friendships. So it kind of, we watch what others do,
Yeah,
and we let, and I recalled a story that when I was at preschool, not me at preschool, but I was at preschool when my nieces were at preschool, and watched a little girl, and it looked like she was playing with other children by the sandpit. And I don't know why. I was undiagnosed at this point, but I watched her, and I watched her watch the other children playing in the sandpit,
yeah,
and observing, and then copied what the other children were doing in the sandpit, but at no point interacted. And it was almost like she'd waited for an appropriate amount of time, looked around, got a book, went and spoke to an adult. And there were a couple of other little instances at that same time with interactions where I saw her. It's funny what you're drawn to, isn't it? What you're drawn to observe. And I saw her watch, mimic, go about what she actually wanted to do. And that was at the age of 3. And you just think how, it's something that's just at such a natural progression. If you want to feel as like you fit in or belong or to connect, you have to be a version of yourself that isn't you. But how unbelievable that we learn to mask and do that from such an early age like that,
yeah,
which I think, I totally understand what you're saying. I don't know that I will ever not mask. I'm hoping, I mean, I'm only a year in. I'm hoping that I will create connections with people that I trust to be able to unmask in situations, and with people that I trust and connect with. I don't know that that's ever going to go completely. I don't, how do you feel? Because you're like obviously much further on in your diagnosis.
yeah.
So how do you feel with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ultimately it's a survival strategy, isn't it?
Mm,
And the fact that you witnessed that happening at age 3, I'm not surprised. It's kind of come to light actually just recently how young we are when we start doing that.
yeah,
And what the teachers were saying about how girls generally, you know, not all, are more socially motivated. And then there's the whole society conditioning, be a good girl, don't speak
yeah,
up, please people. Um, you know, I'm, I've got a rant actually. This is related because it's about people pleasing. But I was watching a bit of This Morning yesterday. Don't
okay,
really watch it, but I had time to kill. And Vanessa Feltz, Phil Schofield, and Holly, they were doing a phone in, and the subject was people pleasing. So I was like, oh, because I'm a
Yeah,
recovering people
yeah, me
pleaser.
too.
Um, so I was really interested, and I caught it halfway through, admittedly. But basically, the woman had phoned in saying, I'm a hairdresser, I'm going on holiday to see my husband's parents. They want me to cut their hair when I'm there. I'm not sure how I feel about that because it's my holiday.
Yeah,
Fair enough, right?
totally.
So what would your response be to that girl? What would you say?
I would say to her to do what she felt was right for her. If she didn't want to cut the hair, to politely explain, I'm on holiday, I really don't want to be cutting hair. I'd probably say I don't mind doing it when I get back, or I don't, I'm because I'm a natural people pleaser, so I'd look for a workaround.
Yeah,
But I would just say it's your holiday. If that's not what you want to do, don't do it.
yeah. So I'm glad you said that, and I thought you would, otherwise I wouldn't have put you on the spot like that. My thoughts exactly. Here's what Vanessa Felt said.
Oh no.
Oh, I'm a people pleaser myself. Oh, do you know what? It's probably worth just doing the haircuts to save any any upset. And I was like, what? And then Phil and Holly joined in. Yeah, to be honest, the amount of time you're spending worrying about it, you could have just done the haircuts anyway. So to save, and this was, and I was like, what? What? I think Holly might have then said, um, why don't you just say, like, what you could say is, I can do your haircuts at this time on this day, and then apart from that, I'm not available. So the girl said to Holly, oh yeah, thank you. I think some boundaries around when
That
to
was the
do
word
it
that was in my head, boundaries. Yeah.
is, she said, I think that's really helpful to have those boundaries. Thank you. So the woman knew the answer, but she'd phoned in and they were telling her basically to carry on being a good girl and being a people pleaser.
But I mean, irrespective of being autistic, like that sort of behavior and advice it's awful, isn't it? Because all that teaches you is that what is important to you and how you feel and your boundaries are irrelevant. And
Yeah,
that if somebody wants something from you, you should just give that over no matter what.
yeah.
That's
And
terrible.
I know. And I mean, I had a big day out yesterday. Had I not been having a big day out, I would have, and I probably still will, to be honest, send Vanessa, Phil, and Holly a tweet or something, because I'm just so, well, I'm outraged, to be honest.
I think that, yeah, and we've talked about boundaries before, though, haven't we? And I think that it's really, it's really, really difficult. Anyway, so I mean, the reason I'm kind of umming and ahhing is because there was a story I was going to recall, and I don't think I should. But I think it's really tricky when you sort of grow up and you're autistic and you desperately want to do right by people. Like I always used to say, I was very quick at almost going and checking out what do you need from me, what do you need from me. Okay, and finding a way to be that version, to be accepted or to not be told off or to be good enough, be the good girl. And it's difficult enough when you're younger, but when you're an adult and you're trying to advocate for yourself, or you've got something like a holiday that really is your time to go and enjoy that, to
Yeah,
still be being told put other people first, put other people's needs before you.
yeah,
And actually the backwards message of that is you don't matter, you're selfish, what other people want comes above what you want.
yeah.
That's outrageous. You
I
sent me on a
know.
rant now.
I don't worry.
I didn't
I'll
even watch it.
well, I'll send them this bit of video. I'll cut this bit and just say, look, this is shocking. We're talking about, you know, autism, ADHD, and of course, it's not just autism, ADHD people that end up being people pleasers. However, they are more susceptible,
Vulnerable. Yeah.
vulnerable to it.
Mm.
And then you've got people, high profile people telling you to do it. Like, no.
And I think the danger of this, and I was having a conversation, funny enough, earlier on today with my mum about being literal. And I think even if that advice wasn't aimed at somebody that was autistic ADHD, like for me as an autistic ADHD person hearing that, I take that very literally. I'm like, oh, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So even though I'm someone that's really trying to set boundaries and sit with who I am and unmask and be a version of myself I want to be, which hilariously at the moment mostly means don't interact with anyone else because
Yeah.
the fewer people I have to interact with, the less effort you know what I mean? And it's not the healthy way to do it. But I think as a autistic ADHD, hearing that advice is being given out, I would interpret that literally to think that's what you're supposed to be doing. And it's really difficult then to think, how do I show up with boundaries and put my own needs first? And if you think about if somebody is autistic and ADHD, the consequences of bending yourself out of shape or putting other people's needs first, it's frustrating for anybody if you're a people pleaser and you sort of say yes to something when you meant no and then you resent it. But I think it goes a step further if you're autistic, because the consequences then of putting somebody else's needs first might mean that has quite a significant impact on you and your well-being, your energy levels, like how you feel and your mental health. But if you're hearing that that's what you should be doing and you're taking that advice quite literally, it's really damaging. I think it's quite dangerous advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Really dangerous, flippant advice. And looking back at the documentary, the teachers were saying about the long-term toll on women, especially women, not exclusively. And
Yeah,
we're, there's transgender, there's, non-binary people that fit nicely into this
yeah,
experience as well. So what's it? Long-term toll on mental health, anxiety and depression. And then they talked about the suicide rate 8 times more likely. She did say anxiety, depression, and ADHD. I was a bit like, that's not a mental health condition.
I was going to say, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, it's a brain difference, as we know.
Yeah,
Um, but it could have been dodgy editing. I'll let them go with that. But you're right, this people pleasing, the consequences, especially when you take things literally, you hear stuff and absorb it, you know. Um, Now I'm questioning things. I never did. I just
yeah,
absorbed it and took what people said as truth.
yeah.
So of course people are anxious and depressed and goodness knows what else.
And do you know what's really interesting? Because that watching this episode of Inside Our Autistic Minds, like it's really been on my mind since I watched it on Friday night. And in true autistic ADHD style for me, I went down a rabbit hole of research. Um, but I also discovered that some research papers which said that it's 70% more likely for autistic females to have anxiety and depression and mental health
Yeah.
challenges, that because it is so impacting. And I think I have a bit of an issue with stereotypes anyway, so whether that's an autistic stereotype or a female stereotype, I think if you have that like blend of what's expected or what people assume autism and ADHD look like and how difficult that is, because it's only really been like less than a decade they've started to recognize the nuances in females and how that presents. But if you even look at the school systems or the support that's available, it's still male dominated. It's still based on male traits, not really based on female traits. And with the education system, it is still one autistic person is treated like every other autistic person. There's no balance of needs or nuances or support. But then I think you tie in stereotypes of what girls or women or females should be or should not be and the roles that they play in society. I just feel like this like layering of outdated stereotypes, and that spreads through everything, right? That spreads, and I'm not just talking about females and autism, like stereotypes in general I think are highly dangerous for society and they're so outdated. But I think that no wonder when I look at some of the challenges that I've had, and I think about, not knowing that I was autistic, ADHD, but what was expected from me as a female from society, the amount of times that people have said to me, oh, it's such a shame you're not married, it's such a waste you didn't have children. And like, I had these stereotypical roles to fulfill. And then you add in that kind of complexity of autism and ADHD, and those stereotypes are incorrect for female presentation. I'm like, no wonder it's so difficult, and no wonder the impact is so devastating on mental health and coming to terms with diagnosis when women are diagnosed later in life. Sorry, that's a total rant, but I don't know how you feel about that, whether that's something you'd agree with.
Hold on. Yeah, I mean, God, stereotypes, I've always felt the impact of that, growing up, like what a girl should do. I was always playing football, a boys' thing, which of course isn't a boys' thing, but was seen as. I was
Yeah.
always on my BMX playing with my one friend who was a boy. So I never really got into this whole, like, in a way, I was quite strong because I did conform, but I didn't, there's no way I
Yeah,
was going to go and play dolls or whatever,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there was something that you just talked about, and I'm just looking through my notes because it really hit home, and I'm just trying to think what it was. Masking. There was a lot about masking with Flo, wasn't there? The autistic improviser, and I just thought that it was really well made how Chris said, like right at the beginning, now, and it being an improviser isn't something that I or most people did associate with being autistic.
Yeah.
Um, and on the surface, it might be a bit strange, but actually, it's not. For a comedian who's, you know, making people laugh, as an improviser myself, and you're one too, it's kind of on my terms.
Yeah, yeah.
And for someone that's myself, who's a big trigger, has always been when people laugh at me when I've done something wrong or said something silly. um that's massive. So that's one reason I kind of went into comedy. For there's so many reasons, but
Yeah.
um
It
yeah,
gives
I'm
you
not
back
sure.
the control, doesn't it? And the power. And
Yeah.
I thought what was interesting with Flo, and I think I was sobbing my heart out, and probably because this is quite raw
Mm.
for me, so I'd be interested in your experience of it, was what she had hidden from her mum, and the fear that she had about whether her mum would still love her or whether she'd be disappointed when she actually realized. And that's something that I was really worried about. So my mum was the first person that I talked about, but with both my autism and ADHD. And I've kind of slowly opened up to her about, there's things that she can recognize now that we talk about from my childhood. She'll be like, yeah, no, now I know. So we were laughing earlier because when I was quite young, I don't know if you remember the Anchor Cows advert, when the cows could dance, they would do this like little
Oh
dance with
yeah,
the anchor butter. So
green
my,
green
yeah,
grass or
oh yeah,
something.
yeah, yes, it.
Yeah.
So my mum and dad told me that those cows had been taught to dance. Old little literal me totally
Believe.
believed that. Like, and there are
Oh
many, because I was always told I was the most gullible child, but because I'm like, well, if you're telling me that's what's happened,
yeah.
that's clearly what's happened. Um, so there's things that my mum can now reflect back on and go, that makes sense. But there's lots of things that I'd really hidden. One of them was when I would be overwhelmed emotionally, that I think I've shared this before, that I would go into my room and put a sock in my mouth, and I would almost just not almost, I would just hit myself, have an absolute meltdown crying, but making sure nobody could hear me. And that's how I would deal with this overwhelm, like, emotion. And when I started to open up and explain some of these things to my mum, it was really that fear of, is she going to be disappointed in me? Will she not love me because I'm not how she thought I was? And it really took a lot of courage, I think, for my mum to open up and listen. I mean, she mum's in her 70s, so to be able to kind of be open to that. And I really felt for Flo's mum, because I know from my conversations with my own mum that she has this sense of guilt of, why didn't I notice, or could I have noticed? What could I have done differently? And I've always said to my mum, like, if you'd have gone to the doctors, like, I don't know, I'm 47, so over 40 years ago, that had just told you I was an anxious child. I was,
Yeah.
that it wasn't something that anybody would have recognized or done anything about. But I just thought it was, for that dynamic with Flo and her mum, it really brought up for me the emotions, that the fear and the vulnerability I felt sharing, but also the compassion I had from my mum around, that was really hard for her too. So I
Yeah.
was sat there sobbing when, like, Flo's mum was watching it.
Yeah, I
How
know.
did you find it? And I guess, how was that experience sort of for you when you were more open about sharing?
Well, the thing is, my mum died about 10, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
So she did know, because she'd filled in some forms for my assessments and things.
yeah,
But I think she was ADHD herself, possibly autistic.
yeah,
And she couldn't remember a lot. She remembered me being, happy child. Um,
yeah,
but interestingly enough, I was looking through my assessment letter because I went for an assessment for autism first of all,
yeah.
thinking that they would. I did say when I wrote to them initially, like autism, ADHD, and Tourette. So I thought naively that they would be looking for those three things at once.
And they
But of
don't.
course they don't, and they don't even, people that assessed me, I know things are different now, 12 years on or whatever, like didn't make any reference to the fact that I could also be ADHD. Oh, nice cat. Hey,
Oh,
Maverick.
Maverick.
Um, and it was just, yeah, they did speak to my mum, but my mum's memory was quite limited. Although the first thing in the report says Susie's mum, Christine, said that Susie used to line up her teddies every night before she went to bed, and if the one wasn't quite correct, she'd start all over again. Next sentence, Susie had birthday parties and she went to birthday parties. Therefore, they didn't write this, but fill
Yeah,
in the
the
gaps.
gist.
Therefore,
Yeah.
can't possibly be autistic. So basically, that first assessment was like not enough evidence, not enough childhood evidence for
Wow.
a diagnosis of autism. We say, not in those exact words, um, mild, anxiety and mild OCD. And I remember at the time saying to them, because they were like, nah. And I was like, what about my sensory issues? And they had this patronizing smile and they went, that's anxiety. And now sensory issues are in the criteria now. They weren't then. And they wanted to put
Wow.
my sensory issues around smells. It's not just sounds, down to anxiety. I'm like, you're effing kidding me, you absolute idiots. And reading that report, I can read it in two minds. Yeah, there's not enough evidence, blah, blah, blah. But um, however, there were rituals. Oh, Susie didn't talk at length about her interests. Well, I used to watch The Sound of Music over and over again.
Yeah,
I used to watch Rainbow over and over again. The Wizard of Oz. I used to make my mum read my nursery rhyme book over and over again.
yeah,
I had to kiss my mum and dad goodnight once there, three times there. Otherwise, and this was like really young, probably age 3 or whatever. Otherwise, I've had this awful feeling of unease.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
just, I mean, yeah, I'm. I did get diagnosed later with my ADHD, and they were said clinically significant autistic traits, which
yeah,
for now I'm not okay with, but I am going to see someone again, and just for peace of mind and being autistic, and I want the truth out there.
And I think it's really hard. Like I went the opposite way to you. So ADHD first, oblivious to the fact that I was autistic. And it was that psychiatrist that said that he was referring me for I can't remember what the score, 5 out of 6 on the autism scale was what I'd or something like that I'd scored, but he couldn't officially diagnose. And so then I got sent for diagnosis and went down that route of being assessed by 2 more psychiatrists. But the forms that my mum filled out for my assessment were similarly, it was like I was the perfect child. But I had my school reports, so my school reports told a completely different story. And actually, by the time I'd had my ADHD assessment and went to autism assessment, and mum had been able to like reflect, because they don't, I mean, I just think for parents, like, love them, particularly like I was born in the 70s, like they're just like muddling along being parents. Like you only know what you know, like, right? You just think this is my child. I'm just going to deal with the fact that this is my child. And I think but it was so lovely watching Flo on the program, because I thought it was such a mixture of her strength and her bravery and her vulnerability to be able to say, I really want to show you who I am and the parts of me that I'm hiding, so that you can love me as I am. But she still had that vulnerability of like, what if my mum doesn't love me, all these parts of me? And I thought that was probably, I mean, a good representation of what a lot of people probably go through when you go through late diagnosis. And not just with family members, is it? It's like with friends and with, I loved the impact of Murray's friends, like the close friends and family, when they saw that video, that level of like on of connection on so much more of a deeper level. But when you feel like you can like let your mask down or let people in, it's such a vulnerability, because you've been this version of yourself for so long and fought so hard to kind of hide or cover things up or mask, whatever term you want to use. But actually it's quite interesting, because you were saying like even over 10 years on, you don't think you'll ever fully stop masking. And I just don't think I'm not even sure that's possible, to undo such ingrained behavior. Like I'm rocking towards 50, like I've had like almost 50 years worth of, it's immense, isn't it, to think you find a balance of I can let some of these barriers down or the mask down in these environments and with these people, but actually there's going to be an automatic protection of your vulnerability in certain situations where that's just not possible. I don't know, what's been your experience?
Well, something that's really coming to the surface recently for me is like you say about unmasking. And I don't see it happening, doesn't mean it can't happen. I always used to get, because my facial expression didn't really, it was always, not always, but it was quite flat sometimes, meaning I wasn't walking around smiling all the time, because that would be a bit mad, wouldn't it? But I was really sensitive to idiots saying, cheer up, might never happen. So they're making that judgment on you. And I've had this fear of judgment like for forever. I don't have it as much anymore because I'm working to undo it. So what I did was I couldn't stand that comment or people commenting how my facial expression was or wasn't. So what I did, I made a mask, a smiling mask, and I still do it. You won't see a photo of me not smiling unless I'm being like silly. And again, that's still like within my control. Here's a silly picture of me being serious. But
which is actually you being silly, so it's not you being serious, it's
so it's I took a photo of myself crying at this documentary earlier because I just couldn't stop, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I don't know, I think people think I'm this all smiling, singing, dancing, positive person, which in some respects I am, but
Yeah.
underneath it, it's like there's, there's a lot of healing still to do with all this covering up. And but with the facial thing, I do, if I'm out and about, I kind of try and make my face look not smiling, but not grumpy, if that makes sense.
So there's two things that just came to mind, and you don't have to answer. So I'm going to put you on the spot now. So you said you took the picture of you crying and you're not sure what you're going to do with it. So what would be the fear, or what would be the thought if you posted it?
The thought would be, I guess it's judgment, but the judgment of, oh, she's being so dramatic, or do you know what I mean? Which,
Yeah,
I guess I don't like seeing loads of pictures of people crying
yeah,
myself.
yeah.
So there's that internalized kind of ableism. I don't know what it is. I guess it's layers of not expressing my feelings growing up. So it's an element of that, isn't it? So it's about being vulnerable.
And the unknown of how people will respond
Mm.
or think about that. And the other thing that, so as you were talking and saying you almost had this, like, your expression didn't match what was necessarily how you were feeling. I used to get that a lot. Cheer up, love, it might never happen.
Yeah.
And my response used to be, it already has.
Yeah. Yeah.
As in, idiot. But I
Yeah.
think, and this, I don't know if you can kind of relate to this, but sometimes I would almost have that, not a blank expression. I don't even know what the expression would be, but I was trying to figure out what was going on and process things, particularly if there's like, I have really bad sensory issues. So if I'm someone that's really busy, there's a lot going on around me, maybe too many people are talking, or I'm awful if I don't know where I'm going or exactly how to get there and things aren't clear to me. I have like a lot of anxiety about that kind of the unknown, not being able to plan for every freaking eventuality that might come my way. But so the look on my face can almost be a processing, like, what's going on, what do I need to do, where do I need to be, am I safe?
Mm.
And it doesn't translate to necessarily the situation that I'm in. So people make an assumption and interact with, I don't know what. But again, what gives people the right? I wouldn't dream of doing it. Like that, I think that's
No.
sometimes what blows my mind, is like, some of the times when people approach me and say the type of things they say, not in a million years would that be my response. Do you find that?
Yeah, and I think that's probably because we have been on the receiving end of it. So we're really empathetic to how that can make someone feel, and assumptions are the worst. They're assuming that I'm unhappy or whatever. And like you say, there's probably all sorts going on. So it's another thing to think about, isn't it? Oh, I've got to make sure my face is okay for that person that's walking past me. I mean,
Which is just, I mean, that's a literal form of masking, really, isn't it? It's like, I mean,
yeah, yeah.
so I'm not very good at, I don't think I naturally walk around smiling, because I my idea of hell is someone stopping me for a small talk chat. So I look at the floor a lot. And I've quite liked the cold, horrible weather, because I've got a trapper hat that I pull down to about here. So good luck making eye contact with me. And I walk around looking at the floor. But I think it's like, it's really difficult. I can't even remember where I was going with that. I went off on one then. What was I even talking about?
Thief is like the literal mask.
Yeah, so I don't have like a smile. I don't have a smile on my face. It's like a pure look of panic. Get home without me. My trapper hat covers my ears. Don't stop and chat to me. Clear signals. But I think it's, if I have to smile for something now, I think because I just don't interact with people. My mum says I need a better term for this, but my mum says I look like a serial killer. So I do.
I'm
If you
sorry. I'm
I mean, it's not ideal, but
No.
she's like, that's what, and I don't know if for anyone that's seen Friends, if they remember the episode where Monica and Chandler get engaged and she wants to have a nice photograph for the papers, and Chandler does the same sort of smile as me. Let me see if I can demo it for you.
Sorry.
It's like a
It's like you're just moving your mouth rather
it's
than
super sinister. And so what happens in that, for anyone that's seen the episode of Friends, I remember, is the photograph that goes in the paper for Monica and Chandler's engagement is actually Monica and Joey, because like the picture is so bad. She's like, no, like absolutely not having that in there. But I just find it really, and it's a mask. It's like, oh, this is socially acceptable.
yeah.
But it's so difficult to think. I find it hard to process that people do this stuff naturally. Like people like that blows my mind that people can walk around without processing all this stuff in their heads and like thinking about how they need to come across and masking, whether it's like from how you look or how you interact, and that they have, you know, even blows my mind that someone can go to a restaurant and not know what's on the menu and choose. They can look at a menu, Susie, and they can go, I don't know, I'm going to try that. I'm like, who are these people? Because I cannot comprehend how that works. So what I would do in that situation is find out where we were going. I would phone them up to make sure that they could cater me for me for a start. I'd study the menu multiple times. I would pre-choose what I was going to have. I'd have a couple of options just in case as a backup. I would breeze into the restaurant. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to have. I do. And I'm looking at the menu, but I'm acting in a way that everyone else is acting to appear normal.
Yeah.
But even though I know what I'm going to eat, the anxiety in my mind is, what if I don't like it? What if it's not cooked properly? What if I get an upset stomach? What if I, it's horrible. It's such but I think what level
Stressful.
go to mask at multiple levels, to visually appear normal, to socially, I avoid it at all costs. Like,
Yeah.
hallelujah to my friends that like accept the fact we go to the same place every time we meet up and I eat the same thing and I drink the same thing.
Yeah.
Those are my
And
kind of
that's
people.
and that's ultimately what you want, isn't it? People that love and accept you for who you are, and they are out there.
But you've just got to have the ability to take the mask down, haven't you? And I think maybe people underestimate what that takes. And like watching Flo's story on Chris Packham's show, maybe will be a bit of an insight into how emotionally difficult and how vulnerable and actually therefore how brave you have to be to put yourself out there without a mask, fearing that you might be rejected by those closest to you. Like,
Yeah.
that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, people do like pre-diagnosis, they don't even know they're masking, do they? They're just burnt out, exhausted,
Yeah.
unhappy, depressed, anxious. Um, Not all, but
Yeah.
and then post-diagnosis, yeah, those real fears of rejection, and especially when people make unhelpful comments. And I think we say this every time, but people need to hear it, don't they? That comments like, "Oh, I'd never have guessed," or "Oh, you don't look autistic," or "Oh, you're not like my cousin who's autistic." Like, no, because everyone's different. We're all human and we're all different, and no two autistic people are the same.
I mean,
Um,
Chris Packham said that, didn't he? He was like, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I recorded a couple of little videos because, I mean, I know this is a positive thing, but I don't like the wording. International Autism Acceptance Week is the 27th of March to the 2nd of April. The fact that we've got a week about accepting autism,
yeah.
but that's my literal response to it. I'm like, but in fact it's positive. But I've written a blog within my actual skin and scar business, so for me that's quite a big vulnerable thing. I do talk a bit to my clients about it, but I've not really put anything out there that says, hey, I'm autistic and ADHD, this is, and I'm busting 7 myths around autism and from my perspective, and I've recorded some little videos that go along with it. And I have kind of talked, one of the things I talked about was this concept of high and low functioning. And I have actually said in one of them that high and low functioning autism is not about how somebody else experiences us as autistic people, because it's about what is that for us as autistic people. Like, what extent do we go to mask and appear normal and to fit in and to compromise, and what is the impact and the consequence and the fallout from that? You know, what is going on behind the scenes is about somebody's level of autism or how impacting it is, not how does somebody on the other side receive that person. That's something I feel really strongly about, because it's, and I'm sure we've mentioned this before, it's so invalidating. And actually I find it quite humiliating when somebody says to me, well, you don't seem like you're autistic, we don't look autistic. And that comes back to stereotypes though, right? That's where we've got these ridiculous, like, it's like the society has these parameters, and if you don't fit into those exact parameters, like with your diagnosis, if you don't tick these boxes, well, I'm sorry, then you're not autistic. And I'm like, that. And when somebody says to me, you don't look autistic, oh, I wouldn't have said you were autistic. Oh, I'm sorry, should we whip out your qualifications and your what gives you the ability to diagnose me? Like, this is really interesting. And I have to resist that, but I find it like really, like, I mean, I'm making light of it. I find it really crushing, and I will go away and it will really upset me, thinking, I can't even do that right. I'm not even autistic enough, or autistic in a way that that's acceptable, but I don't fit in to an holistic society. And it doesn't matter what I do there, I don't feel like I belong. But now I'm being rejected as an autistic person, which is what I am. And it just compounds that fear of judgment, doesn't it? And fear of rejection. And I just don't know, something's got to change around that, I think.
Yeah, no, that's why I didn't mention it to really anyone for 10 years. I mean, 10 years, I'm shocked at myself. But, obviously I had my reasons. And like I said, fear of judgment has been a big issue for
Yeah.
me. So that's what held me back when I did tell people, and I had responses like you just said. It just made me go into myself and internalize and cover it all up and not think about it. But of course, it's there because it's part of you. So I think what we're doing here, what you're doing with your blog post, talking, having the conversations, trying to kind of refrain from bopping them on the nose when they say ridiculous things.
But it's, I mean, I haven't published my blog yet, because I want to wait until it falls in line with, so, I really believe in being like a strong advocate for, and role model, like, if more of us stand up and kind of go, this is what being autistic, ADHD female looks and sounds like, and share like our actual experiences, hopefully it will challenge some of those thoughts and stereotypes. But I'm genuinely terrified, because in my business, it's not something that I've really talked massively about, but I'm like, if I'm not prepared to stand up and do that, I've got to face those fears myself. And I just think I mean, I have so much empathy and like so much like admiration for anyone that is prepared to kind of through late diagnosis to just try and understand themselves better, and to take that mask off and honor their own boundaries and feelings, because it's really difficult. I'm really struggling with that fear of rejection, and the way people are responding to me. And I guess it's good that other people know that this is all part of an experience, something we all experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and something that really helped me with this fear of rejection, especially around disclosing my various neurodivergent conditions, was this book that I've told you about. I know you've got it. You have read it, The Four Agreements.
Yeah.
It's been so invaluable to me to really like reread it and recognize that what anyone says to you is not personal. And I know it feels personal, but it's a projection of them, their
Yeah.
their lack of knowledge, their ignorance, and all of those things. So I think always, if we always come back to ourselves
Yeah.
and remember who we are, and I know we're figuring that out, that's a way to overcome that rejection when people say ridiculous things like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you don't look autistic," you know. But anyway, let's wrap this up. My view on this documentary was amazing. I was
Mm.
really impressed with how well they've done it, to be honest. There
Yeah.
was nothing in there apart from that little bit where she said the girls come to our school with with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. What that's, other than that, I thought it was flipping beautiful. What are
Yeah.
your final thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend it, whether you are autistic, ADHD, know somebody that is, or just want to kind of learn more and be more open to kind of understanding and supporting others within society. I think watch it because it's really heartwarming, it's really insightful, parts of it are incredibly profound. I think they did it really well. I think Chris Packham's phenomenal, but I just think starting some of these conversations, and I'm hoping that will just help the holistic and autistic, and neurodivergent communities, like, for life just to be a bit easier.
Yeah, yeah, and to really listen. That's what Murray was saying. He pining to be heard.
Oh,
Really listen to me. Those are a few things that he said,
yeah,
and it's like just listen to people
yeah,
and believe them. That's
yeah,
what I say in all of my talks that I deliver, any of my trainings. Listen and believe.
yeah. I love that. What a great note to finish on.
So thank you so much. I'm gonna send a clip of this to Vanessa, Feltz, Phil, and Holly,
Yeah,
because they need to know that that was not okay.
yeah.
Maybe
No,
other
that's
people.
brilliant. I'm glad I didn't see it. I might go back and watch it, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I
Well,
love
thank
that
you.
we're wearing pink. I said this when we came on, like we're like color coordinated today.
We'll have to do that every
I
time.
know. What are the chances? I mean, that was by coincidence, but yeah, I'm kind of liking it against your pink backdrop.
Yeah, it's all about the pink. I've even got pink hair.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I wish I could get away with that. I've asked my hairdresser so many times. He's like, no, because he's just like, it won't suit you. He's brutal. He's like, just not going to suit you. I'm like, okay, but it looks amazing.
Thanks. Right, until next time. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks. Bye.
Hello, and welcome to Adventures with ADHD, where we talk to autistic and ADHD folk